Welcome back, Marvels. Dana and I are back for another episode. We hope that this episode finds you doing amazing.
Yes.
Or okay. Sometimes.
Yeah, or we hope it finds you doing. End of sentence.
End a sentence.
Or I should say finds you being, because we don't want you to be a human doing. We want you to be a human
I
being.
like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Is that going on a shirt?
We could. I think it's a great idea. Which, by the way, we are working on that. We've run into some roadblocks, and we are attending to them. They're just taking forever, but we're getting there. Yeah,
we're getting there.
Yeah,
yeah. I think yes, we're getting there. That's another. That's like human being not doing, and we're getting there. That's it.
There. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Here's a good segue.
Okay.
So when do you not be a human being? When you die. How's that for a segue?
Wow. I mean, it's a literal segue, that's for sure.
Yeah.
How autistic of you. Just kidding.
I love it.
Yeah.
We want to talk about grief and loss. I had less than a week ago, I had a dear family member pass suddenly. And so all week, obviously cycling through my own stuff, helping my wife. It was her brother helping her cycle through her stuff. It just was occurring to me how different people grieve in general, which is something we know.
Yeah.
But wondering about how different neurodivergent folks might grieve, right? I can remember when I had losses before I knew I was autistic, kind of having other people be judgy of me, like I wasn't doing it right. Like, why aren't you crying? Or why aren't you doing this? Or why aren't you doing that? Or for me, I've had to learn to, when it involves another person, avoid the question peppering, like what happened with it. And then since I have a physio and medical background, I want to know like the details. So for other people that are going through an acute grief reaction, that's the last thing they want you to be doing, or trying to fix it for them. And so I have done some research on what happened, and I purposely wasn't putting any of it out there because I know that my wife, who's neurotypical, it wouldn't work. Gotten to the point far enough out now where I could say little bits of it, and it had some context for someone else who was asking. But if I would have gone into that right away, I remember when her father first found out he had to have open heart surgery many years ago, and she had never had a loss of anybody in her family. She was terrified of what would happen. Thank God he got through that and lived many more years. But I went to my head, well, and open heart surgery and yada, yada. And she said to me, this is not helpful. And at the time, again, before I knew I was neurodivergent, and I was like, hit the mark. I hit the delete mark.
Wow, you made it 3 minutes, Dana.
What do I do? How do I do this? So it's not that I don't have affect. It's that sometimes it goes in different order. And sometimes the affect for me comes after the cognitive understanding. And, we all cope a different way. And it was occurring to me this week that this may be something that people would be like, oh, this is how this autistic's doing it, and it doesn't fit with how neurotypicals do it. No, it's just different. And then waves of affect come. When my mom died, I had so much responsibility taking care of her towards the end of her life that I was in that mode of take care, no affect. And it's not that I didn't cry right when she died, but it took me a while to really open the lid again. And it was random. It was like a month later, I was headed to my own therapy appointment, and Counting Crows song came on called Anna Begins. Has nothing to do with death. It's about a relationship, should he open himself up to this person? The words didn't make much sense, but there was something about the build of the music that I just lost it
Mm.
in the car. And by the time I got to my therapist office, I was just bam right there. And she was so great because she was saying, it is what it is. Everybody grieves differently. You had to be so responsible that you had to push that down. It might take a while to let that out
Yeah.
again. And so there's all these other factors that can go into it. I think, especially for neurodivergent folks, that make us look like we don't care or we're not grieving. The other thing for me too, when I'm like doing like the ugly cry, as people call it now, in therapy, I could do that, but I don't tend to do that like in front of other people. I feel more comfortable doing it when I'm by myself. The car is a great place. The shower is a great place for that. And so it just is, for me, I've had to learn like where are places that I can emote that I feel completely safe and I'm not going to get shut down, or I'm probably not going to get judged and that kind of thing, which is probably why that's happened. But I think
Yeah.
it makes sense for us sometimes to go to the what if, what if, what if, and the question place, because that's how we sort through the world a lot initially, because it's, it's like this, all these things like light up, and I'm trying to follow all those different pieces. It was a little different when we found out about her brother, because we weren't expecting it, and I'd never had a loss like that, completely unexpected, and we both freaked out for X amount of time. And it's been interesting because we've been trying to remember, what did we say or what were we doing during that 10 minutes? And I was like, now I understand the movies where, people like drop to their knees, and it's
Yeah.
like, and as a good psychologist, I'm like, ooh, bookmark that because now I know what that's like. But it's really been weird because I go back and there's these little nuggets of that sort of keep coming to my memory. Oh yeah, oh yeah. But that was, something like that was really like a traumatic response because we weren't expecting it. So if you also have somebody who's neurodivergent, we've talked about it on here before, probably the majority of people are neurodivergent, have some form of complex trauma, having grown up neurodivergent, bullying, etc. And so if you have those other things on top of that too, and then you get hit with another thing that feels traumatic, how do you deal with that? To fully emote is not typically in our MO, right? It's more
Yeah.
to try to figure it out. And then maybe once we feel like we have a handle on that, to do the emoting piece. And I'm not trying to say there's a right way to do it. It's so different for everybody. I'm just trying to get across the whole idea of how you respond to something like that and how you grieve is really person specific. And there really is no wrong way to do it, right? Other than that,
Yeah.
Kubler-Ross talked about the stages of loss or grief: anger, denial, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And even she said, not everybody goes through them in order. These aren't meant to be ordered. And not everybody like has to finish a stage and then do another stage, right? They popcorn around, right? And so where someone might feel really angry right away finding something like that out, someone might feel, denial was one where like, this can't be happening. I've never experienced the denial thing. I'm like, no, this can't be happening. This can't be happening. And all those cycles continually to repeat. The last stage is acceptance, and that takes a while, right? I think we've talked about it in here. It's crazy that the DSM up till recently had, if it, if you were experiencing significant grief or loss beyond 3 months, it was a disorder. And it's like, really? Have you talked to other cultures and see, how they do it? Like the whole idea of wearing black for a year after you lose someone, other cultures
Yeah.
do it better. It's a little different now, and it's called complicated bereavement. But to me, if you really knew someone well and they were really close to you, it's always complicated bereavement. It's going to be longer than that. But
Yeah.
the intensity of it might, slowly fade, but you're still always working through layers. And then there's like, you and I were talking before the break, like, was it around a holiday? Now, is this the
Yeah.
first holiday without that person? And as I tell my wife who lost her mom 2 years ago, the first holiday is really hard. And the second holiday is really hard, but it's different than the first one because you're a little more equipped to handle the loss than you were on the first holiday, depending on how close it was. And it really, the message to take home here is to really be gentle with yourself and not judge yourself. And then maybe even let people know in your life that there's no right way to do this. But it really started to intrigue me about how neurodivergents might do this process differently than neurotypicals, what it's like. And then we talked about animals in here, pet loss
Yeah.
is another one that I constantly, neurodivergent or not, I have a lot of people come up against a wall of people that say things like, well, it was just a dog or it was just a cat. And to a lot of people, that might be true. And to a lot of other people, that's like their lifeline and absolute, they're more connected to that than they were to a human in their life, right?
Yep.
I think it's getting better. Like I see a lot of TikTok videos of people that are saying, I can't even function because I lost my dog yesterday. And most people on there, younger people, are like, oh my God, I totally get it. So I think some of the judges are from people who, grew up at a time where you're like, you don't do that, When
Yeah.
I was first at Vet Tech, it was novel to send owners cards saying, I hope you're doing well and so sorry for your loss. That was like a totally new thing. And that was like the mid 80s. Now it's different, right? It's very different. Most places have a special room for that and that kind of stuff. So we as a culture in the US don't do grieving well. Most Western cultures just try to like do that. We were laughing the other day, me and my wife, that the technicality of her work, you get 3 bereavement days a year. And I'm like, 3? Okay. So, first day you're in shock, the second day you cry a lot, and the third day you're like getting over it, and then the fourth day you have to go back to work.
Oh my gosh.
But that's really typical in this culture. Most companies do like a 3-day bereavement thing.
Some companies don't do any bereavement.
Yeah, you can use your sick days or whatever, but it's like understood that like 3 days, then you should be able to work again. Yeah.
I mean, I think to your point, Dana, understanding how you process big emotions, grief being a big emotion, I when you were describing yourself and wanting to know the details because your mind was curious about those things, that's a very thought-based, head-based, top-down, right? What we consider in psychology, this kind of top-down thing where this is really in my mind. Right? I'm managing this loss through thinking and through thoughts. Whereas, this kind of emotion and this wave of feeling, which, so often is like this bottom up idea, right? Like, how do we marry these two? And it's so interesting because, what I've observed with my clients is that, I think autistics get a bad rap. They're like, people are like, they don't feel. And it's like, I think it's the very opposite, actually. I've observed that they feel so much. If anything, they're quite empathic and empaths, but they get kind of shut down by their emotions. Yeah. So there's not really this kind of learning of how to emote because I get so overwhelmed and overcome with floods of emotion that I just kind of like squash it, right? I repress it and I think about it and I think about it. And there's something to this where, this idea of like, how does your self-knowledge lead to your self-care?
Yeah, sure.
Right? Yep. Right? How do you sit with this? I will say a majority of my clients have very, very big reactions, sometimes, if not bigger reactions to their pets and animals dying than people in their life.
Sure.
I'm not saying that's an autistic thing or a neurodivergent thing per se.
Right.
But I've noticed this, and what they get is how shallow of you. You didn't cry when grandma passed away, but you cried when your bird did.
Yeah.
And so here we are, right? Now there's this kind of judgment on what's the right type of grief.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. And
right.
You mentioned the top down and bottom up. And I think it's a really good point because neurodivergent folks tend to be bottom up. And so we gather all this data, right, to make sense of it first. And that's as you were talking, I'm like, that's what I was doing. The part of me that was like, how the hell did this happen? No one was expecting it. And I was a couple days later in the peer-reviewed literature looking at how many hospitals do this. And it is the standard of care now if you don't meet the risk factors, which he didn't. And I wanted to know that this was not expected and it was a surprise. And all the literature was showing that. And I was like, see there. So it was helping me with like my denial of what was happening. Like, it can happen, but it's actually really rare. And that sort of was like a validation somehow for how everybody's like, what's happening? It's like, okay. So that was sort of that bottom up. And then for me also having those details in my mind, I can visualize I try to put myself in his shoes, like what he was feeling. I'm literally am like picturing the OR and what it was like, right? And some people would say, oh, that's so morbid or whatever. No, it's almost like, for me, it's that bottom up, but it's also like, I feel like I'm honoring and more connected with that person when I do those things, right?
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
with animals, there's more space to do that because they're not talking to you and, saying, don't do this or whatever. But there is that sort of 6-dimension connection with them that we don't necessarily have with humans because there aren't those blank slates. You can certainly have that, but I think there's a reason why losing animals you're really close to are really tough. That, and they sort of depend on us and we're their caretakers. And so there's that whole other layer of that.
And
right?
it's unconditional acceptance.
Totally.
I mean, animals are unconditionally, I mean, maybe not cats, just kidding. But, but dogs for sure. I mean, they're people, they're usually, I'll say this mostly, for dogs, their people are their everything.
Yeah.
I mean, they are there night, day, rain, shine, and consistently. I don't think sometimes in our human relationships, and I laugh whenever I see people wear those dog shirts, like I love dogs. I think my Stanley's hair cutter or like groomer, she said, dogs welcome, people tolerated. That's her sign in the grooming at the groomers. And I laugh, but you understand this. You understand why people become so connected to pets. Birds, I think, especially because they live so long.
Especially if you have a type of bird that can live 75 years.
Just live for so long, and that they're there. And so that's a different kind of relationship, I think, when many of my clients are consistently let down by people.
And I think you bring up a really good point about, as you were saying that, I was thinking, like, I can see a difference in the process in all these family members, and it really is driven by who had the most day-to-day with him.
Yeah.
His husband, obviously, they had all these routines. My wife was in daily contact with him. They texted all the time. And so this sense of, like, we were watching a baseball game for the first time, and it's like, where's the text? Because they would text back and forth. They both loved baseball. And then you can sort of see out from that where someone who was a sibling but haven't seen them in a really long time, having a different flavor, because the day-to-day they may not hit it, but it's more of like, oh my God, I grew up and know this person my whole life. And then a friend that, it's really interesting to me that the attachments, I think, are really what drive the reaction you have. And the attachments with animals are different, can be. And just sort of that flavor that you were talking about, how long you have them or how dependent they are, or how unconditional they are, et cetera, et cetera. So there's so many layers of it and so many factors that go into it. It's almost like this big game of Tetris. Like, what do your Tetris pieces look like in dealing with this? And everybody's is different at any given time. I taught on Friday and I was just starting to tell them, be gentle with me today. We're going to miss this 1 week when we're away traveling. And I started to talk and I had to take a minute. And then by the next day, I said it and didn't need that minute, right? Yeah. And then the day after that, we had something for a big thing going on at work. And my boss is really awesome. He says, if you can come, great. If not, I totally get him. So no, I think actually it'd be good today to be thinking about something. So everybody, and then you go into layers of it, right? When we lost our dear precious dog, it was just wailing, crying for me. And then the next day, nothing. And then the next day was right back there again. And it just is it comes in layers and takes time. Yeah. And I just don't want us to be, whether you're neurodivergent or not, to not judge people by them not doing it right. I think a lot of families don't give that grace. Like, what's wrong with you? Yeah. Yeah. Or if you're feeling too much, oh, you're hysterical, snap out of it. It can go the other way too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's back to that idea of like, be normal. Be quote unquote normal. Why aren't you normal? I mean, and this is something that, I think our community and is really kind of fighting back against, right? Whether it's like the social skills training or like the ABA, like whatever that is. And I'm not villainizing all of it. So, I'm just saying it just has a reputation for that. But like just be normal. And so this idea of create spaces for yourself, surround yourself with people who understand you, but also understand yourself so you can advocate for that. And I know that we've spoken about how unfair that can be, you know, the marginalized person needing to work really hard to advocate. That is where, sadly, that is, it's still our own responsibility to advocate for ourselves. But sometimes we just need help to know who we are and put words to it. Like, we may feel who we are and know who we are deep down, but we don't know how to express it. We don't know how to, you know, communicate that. I think the other thing too, Dana, it's in the reminders, like the reminders. And this is where, you know, like Sue, you know, who's in constant contact with her brother, now that is absent.
Right.
Daily things are absent.
Even within the hour, daily reminders.
Right. Absent.
Yeah.
And I feel like, you know, when I've lost multiple dogs over my life. It's the not having to change the water. It's the not feeding. It's all the little daily stuff that is just so, they're just constant reminders of the loss. Yeah. And so, you know, that quality of grief, but, you know, I think
your routine changes. So now you got an impact. Yeah. I was just thinking to put that piece in there. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Which is like that's not very neurodivergent friendly, you know, when routines change. Yeah. So, you know, I think our message is our usual one, you know, which is like, be good to you, right? Like, be good to you and surround yourself by people who know how to be good to you as well. Like, it, you know, and give yourself time, and there's no time limit, and there's no right way, and there's no normal way. And like, you know, do what you need to do to manage and sit with process loss, all different process.
Yeah. To just be in it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, you know, send our love to Sue for sure, you know, and to you as well, Dana. But anyway, all right, Marvels, on that note, be good to you. We'll see you in the next episode. Yeah.
Bye, everybody.